At an upscale jewelry store in the peaceful town of Riverton, a young black teenager walked in with a bright smile and a hopeful heart. He wasn't there to cause trouble. He was there to find the perfect birthday gift for his little sister. But that joy barely had a chance to bloom before it was crushed by the suspicious gaze of the store clerk. And just a few minutes later, the sliding door opened again, not to welcome a new customer, but to let the police in. Handcuffs ready, ears tuned to only one side of the story. What they didn't know was that this boy, Jalen Carter, was not alone. Because outside someone was preparing to step in and turn the whole story around. That someone was his mother. It was a golden Saturday afternoon, sunlight pouring over the narrow streets of Riverton, a picture-perfect town with green parks, families strolling hand in hand, and children laughing beneath leafy trees. The air was gentle, everything moved slowly and pleasantly, as if the world never changed. But for Jalen, today wasn't just a beautiful day. It was the result of months of saving, of extra shifts at the local coffee shop, of every single coin carefully tucked into his wallet, all for one reason: to buy a delicate gift for his beloved younger sister, Alia. He had already picked it out, a silver charm bracelet, adorned with tiny stars and hearts, nestled in the glass case of the town's most luxurious jeweler, Belmont Jewelers. Every time he passed by, he would press his forehead to the glass, imagining the way Alia's eyes would light up when she saw it. Today was the day, and he was ready. Jalen walked with purpose, his hand gripping his wallet inside his jacket. He repeated the plan in his head. Just walk in, buy the bracelet, walk out. He adjusted his hoodie, an item that often drew wary eyes, to reveal a clean white polo shirt underneath. He knew the looks he got when he wore that hoodie, but today he chose to ignore the worry. Today he was just a kid trying to buy his sister a gift. He pushed open the heavy glass door. A soft bell chimed. Inside, the store glittered under chandeliers, their light bouncing off glass displays. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and polished wood. Most of the customers were well-dressed middle-aged women, wearing diamond rings that sparkled from across the room. Jalen ignored the curious stares that followed him in. He was used to them. But today he focused only on the silver bracelet, the symbol of all his love, sacrifice, and desire to bring joy to a family that had gone without far too often. Behind the counter stood Margaret Whitmore, a polished middle-aged woman with sleek blonde hair, sharp eyes, and lips always pursed with vague discontent. At first, her face remained neutral until her gaze landed on Jalen. In that instant, the air shifted. Her lips tightened. One hand gripped the edge of the counter. Her once indifferent expression hardened into suspicion, as if this young black teen was a threat. And Jalen felt it immediately, that silent but searing shift, the weight of an age-old prejudice lurking beneath a glossy, civilized surface. The question hung unspoken but loud in his mind. "What are you doing here?" No one said it out loud, but it hung in the air like invisible pressure. Jalen was used to this look, the quiet, suffocating doubt that followed him any time he stepped into spaces where others assumed he didn't belong. But today, he was determined not to let it stop him. Jalen approached the counter with a polite smile and pointed to the sparkling silver bracelet in the glass case. "I'd like to see that one, please," he said clearly and calmly, just as his mother had always taught him. Always be respectful, especially with people like this. Margaret didn't move. She crossed her arms, tilted her head slightly, her gaze sharp as a blade. "Are you sure?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "That one's quite expensive." Jalen's stomach tightened, but he kept his face steady. He pulled out his wallet and carefully opened it, revealing a neatly folded stack of bills, months of hard-earned wages. "I'm sure I've enough," he said firmly. Margaret's eyes glanced over the money, her lips curling into a tight, displeased smile, as if the sight of it alone offended her. But instead of softening, she tensed further. Her right hand twitched, reaching subtly toward the phone on the counter. She made no move toward the display case. Instead, Margaret let out a dry, brittle laugh, like fingernails scraping metal. "And where'd you get that kind of money?" she asked, her voice light but laced with accusation as sharp as a knife. Jalen froze. "Excuse me?" he asked, though he already knew he was entering dangerous territory. Margaret raised an eyebrow, her eyes never leaving his face. "It's just a lot of money for someone your age," she said, pausing before adding, "or maybe you just happened to find it somewhere." Jalen's jaw tightened. He took a deep breath, pushing down the anger. "I didn't do anything wrong." "I work at Parker's Coffee House," he said slowly, enunciating each word. "I've been saving up." Margaret made an ambiguous noise, half chuckle, half sneer. She shook her head slightly and tapped her nails on the glass counter. "And you think I'm going to believe that?" Jalen swallowed the lump of fury rising in his throat. "I think it's the truth," he replied, his voice deeper now. Margaret let out a brittle laugh, as if she had just heard a ridiculous joke. "I should be flattered that you think I'm that easy to fool," she muttered, finally walking toward the display case. "I've worked here a long time, kid. I know when something's off." Jalen clenched his fists at his sides, then forced himself to release them. He hadn't come here to be humiliated. This was supposed to be simple, just buying a gift. He tried to keep his voice calm, even as it cracked inside him. "Can you please show me the bracelet?" Margaret sighed, as if he were somehow complicating her entire life, then finally retrieved the velvet tray from the case and placed it on the counter. "Be careful," she snapped coldly. "Handle it gently," Margaret warned, her voice bitter like vinegar. "That bracelet is worth more than your whole year's salary." Jalen gritted his teeth but said nothing. He reached out carefully, picking up the bracelet. The cool silver slid across his fingertips. It was perfect, just like he had imagined for months. Delicate, petite, with little star and heart charms that shimmered like starlight, he could already see Alia's eyes lighting up when she wore it. But just as Jalen turned his wrist slightly to admire it, the bracelet slipped from his hand. A soft clink rang out as it hit the glass counter, then bounced off and rolled across the white-tiled floor. Jalen held his breath. Before he could stoop to retrieve it, Margaret screamed as if she were witnessing an armed robbery. "Oh my God! I knew it!" she shrieked, her voice slicing through the store. "I knew you were up to something, trying to hide it, weren't you? Thought you could get away with it." The entire shop froze. All eyes turned to Jalen. A teenage boy, a bracelet on the floor, a sharp accusation. "No, it's not," he tried to say, but his voice caught in his throat. Margaret lunged for the landline, punching numbers with frantic fingers. "Call the police, now," she yelled into the receiver. "There's a black boy here wearing a hoodie. He just tried to steal something." Jalen stood motionless. Every word she uttered hit him like a freight train, heavy and cold. The background music had stopped, the murmurs of conversation were gone. The silence wasn't peace, it was pressure, dense, saturated with judgment. He felt every eye in the room boring into him. People edged closer together. A woman clutched her purse tighter. A man took a step back, as if Jalen were a threat. 100 voices screamed in Jalen's head, "Speak up! Explain! Say something!" But another voice, quieter yet sharper, whispered, "What's the point? They won't believe you. And then, from outside, the distant wail of a siren pierced the air. Cold and sharp like a blade slicing into the afternoon calm, the sound of the police, not a symbol of safety now, but of fate closing in. Jalen's heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst. Each second dragged out. He had seen this in the news, in stories his mom told through trembling lips, but living it was something else entirely. Now Jalen was in the nightmare just because of one simple dream, to make his little sister smile on her birthday. His chest tightened, his fingers twitched at his sides, as if every cell in his body was screaming, "Run! Fight back! Don't just stand there!" But he didn't move. Instinct screamed for self-defense, to do something to stop the lies pouring out of Margaret's mouth. But Jalen knew. One wrong move, one wrong word, could make him exactly what they already thought he was. The dangerous black kid. Margaret kept talking into the phone, her tone cold and clipped, like she was describing a high-level arrest. "Yes, right now. I need officers at Belmont Jewelers immediately," she barked. "He's still here. Denying it, but I saw it with my own eyes, caught red-handed." She glanced at Jalen, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction, like she was savoring a scene from a play she had written herself, just waiting for the right actor to walk in and perform. "And make it quick," she said in a lowered voice but loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "He's starting to act aggressive." Jalen's stomach twisted into knots. Aggressive? He hadn't even moved. He'd barely said a word since walking in, but Margaret was painting a picture everyone in the room was all too ready to believe. No questions asked. He could feel it in the way people stepped back. A woman in a floral dress clutched her purse closer. An elderly man in a suit shook his head with disappointment, like he was watching a long-held belief confirmed. Kids these days. Jalen swallowed hard. His eyes flicked to the silver bracelet on the floor, an object that minutes ago symbolized love and sacrifice, now turned into dangerous evidence. He took a deep breath. There was no choice but to speak. "I didn't steal anything," he said, his voice low but simmering with restrained anger, each word pushed out like it had to fight its way through clenched teeth. "You know that." Margaret scoffed. She folded her arms, eyes never leaving his. "Don't play innocent with me," she replied, dripping with disdain. "You really think you can fool me? I know your type." Each word landed like a slap. Her eyes scanned his hoodie, his jeans, his sneakers, as if every piece of clothing was a piece of incriminating evidence. "You walk in here acting like you belong," she continued, her tone sharper now. "But I turn my back for 1 second, and what? Your hand's in the case? I've seen this trick 100 times. Heat flushed through Jalen's face. He didn't have to ask to know exactly what your type meant in her eyes. "Feeling insulted?" Margaret shrugged, feigning innocence. "I'm just telling the truth. Stores like this deal with theft every day, and I don't have to guess who the problem usually is." Something inside Jalen cracked. Not a loud, dramatic shatter. Just a quiet, clean break, sharp and cold. He wanted to scream, to shout in her face that she was wrong, that she was cruel, disgusting. But the words stuck in his throat. Because he knew. It wouldn't matter. To Margaret, and to the people watching, he had been guilty the moment he walked through that door. In the eyes of everyone witnessing this, Jalen was already a criminal. The glass door whooshed open with a cold gust, and 2 police officers entered with stern expressions. The air in the store shifted. Every conversation, every movement stopped. All eyes turned in one direction, toward the young black teen standing frozen in place. "There he is," Margaret shouted, pointing directly at Jalen like he was a wanted fugitive. "That's him! He tried to steal from me!" Jalen couldn't react in time. One of the officers, tall, gray-haired, name tag reading Sergeant Blake, immediately stepped forward, hand already reaching for the cuffs. "You kid, hands where I can see them." Jalen's breath caught. His fingers curled slightly, but he didn't move. Every instinct screamed, "Run! Defend yourself!" But he forced himself to stay still, knowing that one wrong move could ignite disaster. Blake's voice rose, sharper now. "I said, hands up." "I didn't do anything," Jalen said, his voice steadier than he felt. Margaret let out a mocking laugh, shaking her head like he was playing a childish game. "Still denying it?" she scoffed. "After I caught you red-handed?" She gestured toward the bracelet on the floor. "You were going to stuff it in your pocket, weren't you? Typical of your kind." Jalen flinched. "Your kind?" The words sliced through the air, and no one in the store said a word to stop her. The second officer, a younger man with a stern look named Doyle, paused slightly. His gaze shifted between Jalen, Margaret, and the bracelet on the floor. Unlike Blake, Doyle didn't rush. There was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, small, but Jalen saw it, and he clung to it like a fragile thread of hope. But Blake was already stepping closer, cuffs in hand, his face blank and unbothered. "You'll take this outside," he said, voice flat as a command. Jalen could hear every heartbeat pounding in his ears. His brain raced through nightmare scenarios. They all ended the same: tackled, restrained, and a headline that read, "Black teen arrested for attempted theft." Margaret stood with arms folded, her eyes gleaming with triumph, a crooked smile tugging at her lips. To her, this wasn't just an incident. It was justice served. Jalen took a deep breath, then spoke. This time his voice was clearer, stronger. "Call my mother." Blake smirked slightly. "You get a phone call at the station." "No," Jalen said firmly, locking eyes without a hint of tremble. "Call my mother, right now." Margaret rolled her eyes. "Oh, of course. Call your mother. Let's see, who is she? A public defender? An activist? What's she going to do, start chanting for justice?" She let out a dry laugh, not even trying to hide her contempt. Jalen didn't respond. He reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out his phone. His fingers were steady, as if he'd been preparing for this moment all his life. "Mom, I need you to come to Belmont Jewelers right now." Blake's brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't yet look concerned. Doyle, however, was beginning to change. He glanced at Blake, then back at Jalen, perhaps noticing that the boy wasn't crying, begging, or panicking. He wasn't afraid, he was waiting. Time slowed. The air felt like stone. Margaret tapped her heel impatiently. Blake sighed, loosening his grip on the cuffs. Doyle checked his watch. Customers shifted backward. whispering. A few began pulling out their phones. Phones were lifted everywhere now, screens glowing, capturing every second of the unfolding tension. And then the store's door swung open. A woman walked in, tall, composed. Her stride was so deliberate it hushed the entire room. She wore a navy moon suit, perfectly tailored to her strong frame, her heels clicking sharply against the tile-like blades. Her eyes, just like Jalen's, swept across the scene, taking in every detail. She held up a badge, its silver gleam catching the chandelier light. "I'm Dr. Simone Carter," she said, her voice slicing through the air like ice. "Chief of Police, Riverton." Then she turned her gaze directly to Blake, unwavering. "And this," she pointed to Jalen, "is my son." The store fell silent. So silent, you could hear a pin drop. It wasn't just shock, it was the sheer gravity of her words. No one dared to breathe. All eyes fixed on the woman who had just turned the entire situation on its head with one sentence. Jalen stood still, almost in disbelief, but warmth surged in his chest. His mother was here, and no one in that room had any right to lay a hand on him now. Blake froze. His hands still clutched the handcuffs, but his stance weakened. The authority he had projected just seconds earlier seemed to dissolve. Doyle, the younger officer, exhaled, his shoulders dropping slightly. His expression suggested he was now carefully reconsidering his next move. But the most dramatic reaction came from Margaret. Her face contorted as if she had swallowed something bitter. The smug grin vanished without a trace, replaced by panic, confusion, and undeniable dread. She blinked rapidly as if trying to convince herself she hadn't just heard what she had. Her mouth opened, then shut, then opened again. I'm sorry. I didn't know." Her voice cracked, no longer sharp, but a mix of fear and shame. Simone didn't even look at her. Her eyes stayed locked on Blake, cold, composed, but with a very clear warning behind every word. "Sergeant," she said, voice steady and commanding, "I assume you have a reasonable explanation for why my son is being surrounded and nearly handcuffed, without a single question being asked?" Blake swallowed hard, his hand dropping slightly but still gripping the cuffs. We received a call about a theft," he stammered, and we followed procedure." Simone tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. "Procedure," she repeated, stressing the word. "And what exactly is procedure here? Walk in, see a black teenager, and immediately assume he's the thief?" Blake clenched his jaw, clearly flustered. No, that's not what happened." "Isn't it?" Simone leaned in slightly, her voice like a scalpel. "Because from where I'm standing it looks exactly like that." Margaret finally blurted out a few words, harsh, desperate, like a woman trying to cling to slipping power. "I'm the one who called," Margaret cried out. "I saw him, the boy, trying to steal. He dropped the bracelet and it was clear he was going to pocket it. I stopped him in time." She pointed at Jalen, her voice rising in desperation, trying to convince the crowd she was still in the right. "And I was just doing my civic duty," Margaret declared, voice shrill as she struggled to maintain authority. "I called the police just in time, before he could run off with my merchandise." Simone exhaled slowly. For the first time since entering, she turned to Jalen. He still stood quietly. No defense, none needed. Because, in his eyes, Simone saw everything. The smoldering anger suppressed beneath a calm mask, the exhaustion, the injustice, and the most heartbreaking truth of all, that even as the son of the chief of police, Jalen had still been a suspect in their eyes the moment he stepped inside. Simone turned to Blake, her voice low but razor sharp. "Have you reviewed the security footage?" Blake faltered. We were about to." "No," Simone cut in, voice cold as steel. "You had no intention of reviewing it. You were about to arrest a child with no evidence, not a single question, no actual procedure. You were about to fail at your job." Her tone wasn't loud, but it thundered through the room like a storm without shouting. Doyle swallowed hard. He had hesitated earlier, but now, under the weight of both moral clarity and command authority, that hesitation turned into resolve. "We should check the footage," Doyle said, slow but firm, carrying a note of regret. Blake turned on him sharply, his glare burning like fire at the perceived betrayal. But there was no room to argue, not with Simone Carter standing right in front of them. He blew a tense breath out of his nose, jaw clenched. "Fine." Margaret staggered slightly, as if slapped in the face. "No, I already told you what happened," she shrieked, waving her arms. "Everyone saw how he acted. Now you're going to believe her?" She jabbed a finger toward Simone, then toward Jalen, her tone steeped in undisguised panic and bitterness. And that's when Simone turned her attention to Margaret fully. "Just one look." And Margaret froze. Her defiance vanished instantly. Under that gaze she realized, no matter how loud she yelled, she was losing control. Bit by bit, "Mrs. Whitmore," Simone said, voice calm but sharp as a scalpel, "let me make this very, very clear." She took one step forward, deliberate, precise, like a judge's gavel falling. "You're looking at a boy who saved every penny from his part-time job to buy a birthday gift for his little sister. A boy who came to support your business. And you, from the moment he walked in, decided he didn't belong. You convicted him on sight." Simone paused, letting every word sink into the room like tightening cords around Margaret's neck. "So," she finished, eyes locked on Margaret, "I sincerely hope the security footage shows exactly what you claim it does. Because if it doesn't..." The final words went unspoken, but everyone understood them. "Everything you just said, you'll be held accountable," Simone warned, her tone as light as a breeze, but sharp as a blade. Margaret gulped. The smug mask she wore so tightly was cracking. Blake cleared his throat, trying to recompose himself, as though he could escape the storm unraveling around him. "I'll go review the footage," he said, voice tight with discomfort, like a man slowly losing ground. No one spoke, no one had to. The store manager, silent until now like a statue, suddenly sprang to life, hurrying to the back room to retrieve the video. The small monitor behind the counter lit up. A familiar scene came into view, silent, but enough to make the entire room hold its breath. Jalen walked in, smiled, politely asked to see the bracelet, showed his money. Then the bracelet slipped from his fingers, fell. That was all. No theft, no pocketing, no suspicious moves. Just a 17-year-old boy trying to buy a birthday present for his sister. The silence after the video wasn't ordinary. It felt like a thick blanket, smothering the room, leaving everyone breathless. Doyle exhaled and wiped his face, a gesture that held both regret and relief. Blake looked like he had swallowed fire. His jaw twitched, as if trying to contain something burning inside. Margaret, meanwhile, looked as though the ground beneath her had collapsed. She couldn't find anything to hold on to. Simone took a breath and spoke. This time, her voice was dangerously soft. "Oh, what now, Sergeant? Still planning to arrest my son?" Blake stayed silent. Simone turned to Margaret, her gaze no longer cold, but almost pitying. "And you?" She tilted her head. "Do you still have something to say? You were quite certain a moment ago, weren't you?" Margaret's lips quivered, her eyes darted, from Simone to Jalen, to the two officers, to the customers who were now whispering and staring, not with trust, but with contempt and even satisfaction. I just thought," she stammered, her voice weak and broken. But no one was interested in hearing her excuses anymore. Simone nodded slowly, as if she had predicted this ending all along. "I thought so." Lake cleared his throat again, trying to reassert his professionalism. Let's wrap this up here, ma'am," he said, deliberately addressing Simone as ma'am instead of chief, as though trying to shrink the gravity of what had just happened. Simone raised an eyebrow. "No apology?" Blake pressed his lips together but still said nothing. Margaret opened her mouth, trying to salvage something, but she knew there was nothing left to save. Simone turned back to her son. "Let's go, sweetheart," she said gently. Jalen remained still, not because he didn't want to leave, but because he didn't know what to feel. He looked at Blake, at Margaret, around the room, at the place where everything had crumbled, not beneath his feet, but theirs. He should have felt vindicated, he should have felt triumphant, but all he felt was exhaustion. One battle was over, but the war had never ended. He took a deep breath and began walking behind his mother. As he passed Margaret, he stopped, his eyes steady, his voice composed. "I just wanted to buy a bracelet." A simple sentence, but heavier than all the accusations thrown at him. "But maybe what I got today is worth even more." Then he left, shoulders back, head high. And Margaret could only stand frozen, watching the world she once controlled crumble beneath her. The glass door closed behind the Carter mother and son, shutting one chapter but opening a warning to the entire town of Riverton. Inside the store, the air still hung heavy, like a storm had passed through, leaving only silence and truth. Jalen stepped into the afternoon air and took a long breath. He should have felt relieved, but his chest was still tight. 'Cause he knew there would be a next time. His chest remained clenched as if nothing had truly been released. His hands were still balled into fists, the joints aching from having been clenched for too long, ever since the moment Margaret pointed and screamed, "Thief!" Simone walked beside him, tall and composed, her stride deliberate, but Jalen could feel the quiet fury radiating from her with each strike of her heels against the pavement, echoing like the heartbeat of restrained rage. It wasn't until they reached the car, parked a short distance away, that Simone finally turned to Jalen. Her expression was unreadable, cold, yet softened, tired. "You okay?" she asked, her tone steady, but beneath that composure lay layer upon layer of hurt, from someone who had fought the same battle too many times in her life. Jalen sighed and turned to look back at the store through the glass window. He could still see Margaret inside, frozen, stiff behind the counter. Her face was pale, eyes darting, as if searching for a lifeline that no longer existed. Blake stood firm, his jaw clenched. Doyle looked down, his expression a mix of relief and shame. The store manager, who had stayed silent through the entire ordeal, now looked like he wanted to vanish. And the customers, those who had so easily judged, were now staring intently at anything but the truth that had just exploded in front of them. "I'm not sure anymore," Jalen said quietly, running a hand over his face. "I should feel better. I should feel like I proved something. Like I won." Simone looked at him for a long moment. Then she exhaled, her features softening. "You were never supposed to have to prove anything," she said gently, but the words struck harder than any slap. Jalen's throat tightened. He clenched his jaw, struggling to swallow the lump that rose in his chest. "Yes," he murmured, his voice heavy. "I know." They stood there, neither saying more. Between them was a silence without name, a space that held all the things words could never express. Then, the door of Belmont Jewelers opened again. Jalen looked up and saw Margaret stepping outside. His body tensed instantly, every muscle braced, not from fear, but from having grown too used to awful surprises. Margaret emerged, no longer proud, no longer strutting. Her hand clutched the strap of her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. Her face was rigid, lips pursed, as though she was fighting with herself. She had something to say. Since the moment that video played, she had been torn, not by guilt, but by pride, by a crumbling sense of self-image. Jalen held his breath, waiting. Margaret walked slowly, one step at a time, then opened her mouth, only to close it again. Her throat moved. Her eyes flicked from Simone to Jalen and back. Finally, after what felt like centuries, she exhaled and shook her head. Her face twisted into an expression that was half regret, half bitterness. "I," said the beginning. But no apology followed. Just silence. Then she turned, walked quickly, as if moving fast enough could leave the consequences behind. Jalen let out a dry laugh, hollow, without humor. "Knew it," he muttered. Simone crossed her arms and shook her head. Cowards never know how to say sorry. Jalen watched Margaret disappear down the street, her posture rigid, her steps hurried, as if trying to outrun the truth she'd created. He should have felt satisfied, he should have felt vindicated. But all he felt was a deep, aching fatigue. He should have known. People like Margaret almost never face real consequences. They rarely acknowledge the pain they cause, and yet it still stung. Blake and Doyle stepped out of the store. Doyle glanced briefly at the mother and son, his eyes awkward, jaw clenched, his hands fidgeting as if wanting to say something, but having no idea how. Blake didn't look at them at all. He gave Simone a small, silent nod, a dry, reluctant gesture of defeat. Then he turned and walked to the patrol car, stiff and wounded in pride. Jalen exhaled. "So, that's really it?" Simone glanced at him, for now. Jalen turned to look at Belmont Jewelers one last time. Through the window, everything seemed back to normal. Customers browsing bracelets, trying on rings, as if just minutes ago a black boy hadn't been falsely accused in broad daylight. He clenched his jaw, then shook his head slightly. "I just wanted to buy a bracelet," he muttered. Simone sighed and placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. "I know, sweetheart." Jalen inhaled deeply, then exhaled. His shoulders dropped just a little, as if he had released some invisible weight. He turned his back on the store, on Margaret, on the entire chain of injustice that today was only one small fragment of. He walked toward the car, and away from a reality he had never chosen. The car doors shut. Simone sat beside him, quietly gripping the steering wheel, the imprints of her nails embedded in the leather, like scars from a battle she was long used to fighting. The engine started, its hum filling the silence between them. but neither said a word. Outside, the world carried on as though nothing had happened. Pedestrians passed by, cars pulled into parking spots. The sky remained the same indifferent shade of blue. But inside Jalen, Margaret's accusation still burned on his skin, and the judgmental eyes of the bystanders, those who had said nothing, were etched into his memory. At last Simone broke the silence. "You sure you're okay?" This time her voice didn't carry authority or command, just a mother praising her son, an honest question. Jalen stared at the dashboard, his fingers tapped gently on his thigh, then stopped. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice raw. "I feel angry, and feel tired, and I feel like none of this changes anything. Because tomorrow someone else will be in my place, and no one will ask them if they're okay." Simone inhaled slowly. Her grip on the wheel tightened, then loosened. Deliberately. "I know," she whispered. "It's a cycle, again and again. But today, you stood your ground. You didn't let them break you." Jalen let out a bitter laugh. "Didn't break me?" He looked at her, eyes burning with hurt. "I stood there while a woman called me garbage, and everyone else stayed silent. And when she was exposed, when the truth came out, she still couldn't say sorry." He turned fully to face her. "How do you fight something that deep? How do you make people really see you? How do you make someone see you as human when they decided from the start you weren't?" Simone didn't respond right away. She looked straight ahead, her lips pressed into a firm line, her eyes cold but unwavering. Then she spoke, quietly but with steel in her voice. "By never letting them define you, by showing them again and again that they're wrong, even if they never admit it." Jalen turned to the window, his jaw clenched. The answer, though true, offered no relief, because it was never enough. But maybe it was all they had. Another silence settled in the car. But this time, it wasn't suffocating. It was deeper, heavier, like the sediment of a truth they both already knew. Unexpectedly, Simone reached into her bag for her phone. Jalen raised an eyebrow as she opened her contacts and dialed. "Who were you calling?" he asked cautiously. Simone didn't answer immediately. She waited. One ring, two. Then she spoke, her voice sharp and commanding. "Cynthia, I need a press release, urgently, yes, regarding Belmont Jewelers." She glanced at her son, then continued. "I want a full investigation into the 911 call, and I want an internal review of Sergeant Blake's actions. Public statement, too, on the racial profiling and abuse of emergency systems. Make sure the media knows exactly what happened today." Jalen froze, eyes wide. You're really going public with this?" Simone lowered the phone slightly and glanced at him, her eyes calm but filled with intention. "You thought I'd just let it go?" Jalen exhaled, a sound halfway between surprise and long-awaited release. He had seen too many stories like this. Someone falsely accused, humiliated, arrested. Then, even when the truth came out, no one was held accountable. Everything faded into silence. But this time was different. This time, the story didn't end when they walked out of that store. Jalen gave a slight nod. His shoulders relaxed. Just a bit, but enough to let a flicker of hope return. Simone raised the phone again. "And Cynthia, make sure Margaret Whitmore's name is in the press release. If she thinks she can do this and walk away without consequence, she's wrong." 3 days later. The name Belmont Jewelers was everywhere. News stations ran continuous coverage of the incident. Social media exploded with hashtags calling for a boycott. The store's Yelp page was flooded with one-star reviews. Margaret Whitmore was placed on indefinite leave, but rumors said she had been fired. An official statement from the city condemned racial profiling and confirmed an internal investigation into Sergeant Blake. His body camera footage revealed everything, from his gaze, his movements, to how quickly he had reached for handcuffs, without a shred of evidence. Jalen sat in his room, scrolling through the news on his phone. He should have felt victorious. He should have felt vindicated. But all he could think about were the outcomes that could have happened if his mother hadn't been there, if the camera hadn't been recording, if Officer Doyle hadn't hesitated. If even one factor had changed, he might have ended up on the news for the worst possible reason. His thoughts were interrupted by a high-pitched, excited shout. Jalen, look, Mom got me this." Before he could respond, Alia leapt onto the sofa, holding her wrist out proudly like she was showing off treasure. On her tiny wrist, a silver bracelet gleamed under the living room light, the little charms dancing like joy itself. Jalen's chest tightened. "You like it?" he asked, voice catching slightly. Leah beamed. "Are you kidding? It's perfect." She tilted her head, frowning thoughtfully. "What? I thought you were going to get it for me." Jalen paused. It was clear his mom had returned to the store, bought the bracelet for him, so Alia could still have the birthday gift he had spent so long saving up for. She had done it because he couldn't. Because he couldn't bear to walk back into that place where Margaret's stare, the stifling air, and every painful memory still lingered. Finally, Jalen nodded, offering a small but warm smile. "I picked it out. That's what matters, right?" Alia nodded enthusiastically. "Right." Then she hugged him, quick but heartfelt, before dashing off to show it to Mom again. Jalen sat quietly, watching her go. He let out a long, slow breath. Maybe this wasn't a perfect ending. Maybe such a thing didn't exist. But in that moment, Alia was happy. And that was enough. Can you feel the difference between instant justice and the quiet moments of healing? If you enjoy heartfelt, honest stories like this, please support the channel by liking and subscribing. Don't forget to turn on notifications so your day can begin with stories of empathy, courage, and quiet power. Because we believe, sometimes, the right story at the right moment can change a soul.